All right, so we're in Revelation 14. Let's go there. I'm reading from the NIV this morning. I'll just briefly just mention, let's see, Mom wasn't here on Tuesday. Everybody else was
I
here on
watched.
Tuesday. Oh, you
I
watched it?
watched the video.
Oh, okay, good. Everybody else went through Tuesday. Okay, good. Um, then I looked, and there before me was the Lamb standing on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads. And I heard a sound from heaven like the roar of rushing waters and like a loud peal of thunder. The sound I heard was like that of harpists playing their harps, and they sang a new song before the throne and before the four living creatures and the elders. No one could learn the song except the 144,000 who had been redeemed from the earth. These are those who did not defile themselves with women, for they kept themselves pure. They followed the Lamb. They follow the Lamb wherever he goes. They were purchased from among men and offered as firstfruits to God and the Lamb. No lie was found in their mouths. They are blameless. And then I saw another angel flying in midair, and he had the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who live on the earth, to every nation, tribe, language, and people. He said in a loud voice, "Fear God and give him glory, because the hour of his judgment has come. Worship him who made the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the springs of water." A second angel followed and said, "Fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great, which made all the nations drink the maddening wine of her adulteries." A third angel followed them and said in a loud voice, "If anyone worships the beast in his image and receives his mark on the forehead or on the hand, he too will drink of the wine of God's fury, which has been poured full strength into the cup of his wrath, and he will be tormented with burning sulfur in the presence of the holy angels and of the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment rises forever and ever. There is no rest, day or night, from those who worship the beast and his image, or for anyone who receives the mark of his name. This calls for patient endurance on the part of the saints who obey God's commandments and remain faithful to Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven say, "Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on." Yes, says the Spirit, they will rest from their labor, for their deeds will follow them. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Then another angel came out of the temple and called in a loud voice to him who was sitting on the cloud, "Take your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe." So he who was seated on the cloud swung his sickle over the earth, and the earth was harvested. Another angel came out of the temple in heaven, and he too had a sharp sickle. Still another angel who had charge of the fire came from the altar and called in a loud voice to him who had the sharp sickle, "Take your sharp sickle and gather the clusters of grapes from the earth's vine, because its grapes are ripe." The angel swung his sickle on the earth, gathered its grapes, and threw them into the great winepress of God's wrath. And they were trampled in the winepress outside the city, and blood flowed out of the press, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 1,600 stadia. I'm going to keep reading just a little bit. Chapter 15. I saw in heaven in another great and marvelous sign 7 angels with the 7 last plagues, last because with them God's wrath is completed. And I saw what looked like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and standing beside the sea those who had been victorious over the beast and his image, and over the number of his name. They held harps given them by God, and they sang the song of Moses, the servant of God, and the song of the Lamb. Great and marvelous are your deeds, Lord God Almighty. Just and true are your ways, King of the ages. Who will not fear you, O Lord, and bring glory to your name? For you alone are holy. All nations will come and worship before you, for your righteous acts have been revealed. Okay. So I wanted to continue reading into chapter 15 because I wanted to put some more context around chapter 14. So before we get into some more of the details, just to um, give another support for what I talked about on Tuesday, about specifically about the harvest scenes, the 2 scenes at the end there being about the martyrdom. of the church. Um, when we look at chapter 13, you'll remember chapter 13 is about the two beasts and the coming persecution against the church. And that chapter says in chapter 13 that the beast in verse 7 was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. And he was given authority over every tribe, people, language, and nations. All the inhabitants of the earth will worship the beast, all those whose names have not been written in the book of life, belonging to the Lamb that was slain before the creation of the world. And then verse 9, he who has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to go into captivity he will go. If anyone is to be killed with the sword he will be killed. This calls for patient endurance and faithfulness on the part of the saints. So in chapter 13, we have the visions of the two beasts, and we have this description of what the beast will be doing in regards to the people of God, in regards to the saints. And the beast will be given authority over them so that he can make war against them. And many of them will be killed. And so this is an announcement of what's going to happen. This is an announcement. The vision is a future-oriented when John receives it, even though it's a first century occurrence. And it's a warning to the church and a comfort to them about the Lord is bringing this, and then the book itself gives comfort as to what's going to happen. So in chapter 15, we read about, again at the verse 2, I saw what looked like a sea of glass mixed with fire, standing beside the sea, and standing beside the sea, those who had been victorious over the beast in his image and over the number of his name, and they held harps and they sang this song, praise to God. And this, so what we have is chapter 13 is an announcement of persecution from the beast, and that the beast will be attacking and making war on the saints, and that many will be sent, will die by the sword. And that's the point of the call to faithful endurance. And then in chapter 15, we see them, this is a scene in heaven, we see them having come through that period of time. And now they have overcome, they've been victorious over the beast and over his image and the number of his name. And they have been given harps, and they are now singing the new song, the song of praise. And so these two scenes, the one of the coming persecution of the beast and the one of victory, people being victorious, the saints being victorious over the beast, are the context both before and after chapter 14. And so it's so what's the connection then? So chapter 14 tells us, shows us not the destruction of, not judgment against the beast, but martyrdom of God's people. And this is how they're faithful to Jesus, and they end up then in the next scene in chapter 15, they have overcome the beast, not because they've escaped from his persecution, but because they have maintained their witness during the persecution. And so that lends another kind of plank supporting the idea that the two harvests at the end of chapter 14 are not judgment scenes on the beast and his kingdom, but are actually depicting martyrdom, the faithful following of Jesus. So I just wanted to show you that that's where it lies in the book and how it might help us understand the context. So before I go ahead, does anybody have any comments or questions about anything relating to the Revelation? Everybody knows everything. That's awesome. All right. Let's see. So if you're on the outline, if you have the outline, I think we're probably we'll pick up in verse maybe verse 4, the 144,000 which are seen with the Lamb on Mount Zion. It is these who have not defiled themselves with women, for they are virgins. I have a couple of verses there. We've looked at those before about the military command for purity and how this is a military image. I'd like to mention here that the 144,000, military image, the people of God, the army of God, that we also have a military image when we talk about the two witnesses. Just as the beast is allowed to make war against the saints and to conquer them, he also makes war or against the two witnesses. They are the beast from the abyss in verse 7 of chapter 11 comes up from the abyss, will attack them, overpower, and kill them. The wording there is the same war image that's being used. And so we have the idea of the beast making war on the two witnesses, and you make war against an army usually. So the witnesses are also linked with the idea of an army. And I think they're actually, the two witnesses and the 144,000, they're speaking about the same thing. It's God's faithful people. Continuing in Revelation chapter 14, verse 4, the second half, it is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. That is a great description for who Christians are, right? Follow the Lamb wherever he goes. The specific reference here, as I've mentioned before, is that the lamb went to slaughter. That's where the lamb went. And it's interesting that Christ is being called the lamb in all of these passages. Even though he's called the lion once, he's called the lamb 29 times. The emphasis is on not only redemption, but on Christ as the leader in his lamb-like portrayal as the one who goes and receives death at the hands of his oppressors, and that God uses that to bring about the redemption of God's people. Bye, Stephanie. I find it really interesting and humorous that in the Bible, the everything that the world and the devil throw against the Christian, throw against the church, that God takes those things and turns them and uses them in his glorious plan to bring about something good. And so whenever there's, just if you just think about the cross, the very worst thing that the devil could do and that the world could do was done. And God turns that out for the greatest, best thing that ever happened. And he does that with everything that is thrown at the church, at Christ's people. And so when we read in the book of Revelation about the attacks of the devil and the attacks of the dragon and the beast, they are terrifying and they're powerful enemies, but they will not be successful. And this is the confidence that God's people have when knowing they're going to be facing the attacks of the devil and the attacks of the world. The confidence is that as Christ has overcome, as Christ has gone through this before and has overcome, and he ascends and he is on Mount Zion with the crown on his head, so will the people who follow him will go through that and also be overcomers. And that's what we saw in chapter 15. So that it is these who follow the Lamb wherever he goes. It's a really good description of Christians. These have been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and for the Lamb. And in their mouth no lie was found, for they are blameless. So we'll talk about first fruits in a minute. I want to look at no lie was found in their mouth, for they are blameless. Go to Isaiah 53. (53:9), he was assigned a grave with the wicked and with the rich in his death, though he had done no violence, nor was any deceit in his mouth. Revelation doesn't quote the Old Testament very often. This is very close to a quote. It's the closest thing to a quote in the Revelation. It's quoting that last part of Isaiah 53:9, nor was any deceit found in his mouth. Now, Isaiah 53, you all know, is about the Messiah. It's about Jesus and his suffering, redemptive death. And but in the Revelation, it's applied to the followers of Jesus. So it takes this Isaiah 53 passage that's spoken of the Messiah in his capacity as the suffering servant, the Lamb, essentially, and takes that and applies it to the people of God who are following the Lamb wherever he goes. So we have still another underscore of this is about redemptive suffering. This is not about judgment. This passage is about suffering. And if we go back and look at chapter 52, we'll just read a little bit of this. Chapter 52 of Isaiah, starting in verse 1. Awake, awake, O Zion, clothe yourself with strength. Put on your garments of splendor, O Jerusalem, the holy city. The uncircumcised and defiles will not enter you again. Shake off your dust, rise up, sit enthroned, O Jerusalem. Free yourself from the chains on your neck, O captive daughter of Zion. For this is what the Lord says, you were sold for nothing, and without money you will be redeemed. For this is what the Lord says, at first my people went down to Egypt to live. Lately Assyria has oppressed them. And now what do I have here, declares the Lord? For my people have been taken away for nothing, and those who rule them mock, declares the Lord. All day long my name is constantly blasphemed. Therefore my people will know my name. Therefore in that day they will know that it is I who foretold it. Yes, it is I. How beautiful on the mountains are the feet of those who bring good news, who proclaim peace, who bring good tidings, who proclaim salvation, who say to Zion, your God reigns. Listen, your watchmen lift up their voices. Together they shout for joy. When the Lord returns to Zion, they will see it with their own eyes. Burst into songs of joy together, you ruins of Jerusalem, for the Lord has comforted his people. He has redeemed Jerusalem. The Lord will lay bare his holy arm in the sight of all the nations, and all the ends of the earth will see the salvation of our God. Depart, depart, go out from there, touch no unclean thing. Come out from it and be pure, you who carry the vessels of the Lord. But you will not leave in haste or go in flight, for the Lord will go before you. The God of Israel will be your rear guard. Okay, so this is the introduction to chapter 53. And the introduction is all about God's glorious promises of the restoration of his people and and their need to separate themselves from the culture that they're in and be united to God by faith. And it sounds like he's just going to bring about redemption by the snap of his fingers or by a word. But when we start then he starts talking about how he's going to bring about this redemption and how he's going to bring about this glorious picture. And you all know the passage, 52:13. See, my servant will act wisely. He will be raised and lifted up and highly exalted. Just as there were many who were appalled at him, his appearance was so disfigured beyond that of any man, and his form marred beyond human likeness. So will he sprinkle many nations, and kings will shut their mouths because of him. For what they were not told they will see, and what they have not heard they will understand. Then it goes on and gives the suffering servant passage. So the Isaiah 52 and 53 together talk about the fulfillment of God's promises to bring about the restoration of his people, through the suffering of the one who is like a lamb, right? Verse 7 of 53, he was oppressed and afflicted, yet he did not open his mouth. He was led like a lamb to the slaughter, and as the sheep before her shears is silent, so he did not open his mouth. And then in the Revelation passage that we just read, those who follow the Lamb are described in the language of Isaiah 53:9, and so they're equated with this passage. And so this passage then about suffering and being, basically crushed and killed, is being brought into the context where it's talking about the followers of Jesus. And so this would be another indication, that the pressure on the first century church was to apostatize was very intense, and the suffering that in the first 3 centuries of the church that the Christians endured was amazing. And so the Lord calls them in the book of Revelation and says, this is not going to be an unusual thing. This is going to be happening to you because you are following the Lamb, who this is what the Lamb did. So it's an encouraging picture, because at the end the Lamb is resurrected and exalted and receives all of the promises that the Father had made to him. So the Isaiah 53:9 quote in Revelation 14:5 is brings some more background context here, and it's all again the same type of thing. First fruits. So let's talk about first fruits, because they're called first fruits for God and the Lamb. And we have many passages about first fruits, but the main one is in Leviticus 23. And so taking the whole chapter 14 together, what you have is first fruits is mentioned at the beginning, and then at the end you have the grain harvest and the harvest of grapes. And on the calendar of Israel, let me show you where those are on the calendar of Israel. There it is. So hope you can see that. I'll try to let me make it bigger. I know that looks like I made it smaller, but I don't know if that helps. So that's a complex thing. But if you look at the so the inner circle, the most inner one is the months, January through December, January at the top. The next circle, so the second circle, is the Hebrew months, and you'll see the first one is at 3 o'clock on the dial there, 3 o'clock, Nisan. And in the first month, you have in the outer circle, you have your feasts and festivals. So you have Passover, unleavened bread. And then first fruits happens right between the first and the second month, first fruits. And you have harvesting, if you go around that outer circle, you have harvesting all the way around to the Feast of Booths and Shelters, which ends with the olive harvest. The grape harvest takes place between Israel's 5th and 6th month. And I'm looking for Tabernacles on there. Tabernacles is right there. That's where Tabernacles happens. I'm surprised. Where is it? New Year, David Tillman. Oh, Tabernacles is Booths and Shelters. Okay, so the Feast of Tabernacles happens at the very end of the harvest. And the harvest starts with the grain and ends with grapes, figs, and olives, in that order. When we're reading through Revelation 14, we start with first fruits. The 144,000 are the first fruits. and then we go through a couple of these harvests, the grain harvest and the grape harvest. The point is that, and I'll send this to everybody so you have a copy of it, but I'll take it off the screen now. The point is that the reference to first fruits doesn't just talk. I mean, the first fruits basically is how it worked in ancient Israel. Was the festival of first fruits was the offering of the first fruits that were in the new year, and they offered it, and that was a picture of the entire coming harvest. And the entire coming harvest wasn't just that one produce that they were offering. It was one crop that they were offering, but it actually encompassed all of the harvest all the way through. And so when we talk about the 144,000 being first fruits, they're first fruits of all the harvest, of all the harvest. That's what the first fruits signified. And in the context of Revelation 14, you have to wonder why are they being called first fruits here? They're being called first fruits here, and then there's harvests at the end of the chapter. And you have to think there's a link here, that this harvest at the end of the chapter has to do with the first fruits at the beginning of the chapter, rather than we just have a random mention of first fruits and then judgment scenes on the enemies of God. So that's another argument. But let's look at the passage for first fruits, Leviticus 23:9. The Lord said to Moses, "Speak to the Israelites and say to them, when you enter the land I am going to give you, and you are to reap, and you reap its harvest, bring to the priest a sheaf of the first grain you harvest. He is to wave the sheaf before the Lord, so it will be accepted on your behalf. The priest is to wave it on the day after the Sabbath. On the day you wave the sheaf, you must sacrifice as a burnt offering to the Lord a lamb a year old without defect, together with its grain offering of 2/10 of an ephah of fine flour mixed with oil, an offering made to the Lord by fire, a pleasing aroma, and its drink offering of 1/4 of a hin of wine. You must not eat any bread or roasted or new grain until the very day you bring this offering to your God. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, wherever you live." We'll just keep reading. I want to actually read through till the end of the chapter, so we're just going to read the whole chapter. Actually, let me get some volunteer readers. Becky, can you read verse 15 through 22?
From the day after the Sabbath, the day you brought the sheaf of the wave offering, count off 7 full weeks. Count off 50 days up to the day after the 7th Sabbath, and then present an offering of new grain to the Lord. From wherever you live, bring 2 loaves made of 2/10 of an ephah of the finest flour, baked with yeast, as a wave offering of first fruits to the Lord. Present with this bread 7 male lambs, each a year old and without defect, 1 young bull and 2 rams. They will be a burnt offering to the Lord, together with their grain offerings and drink offerings, a food offering, an aroma pleasing to the Lord. Then sacrifice 1 male goat for a sin offering, and 2 lambs, each a year old, for a fellowship offering. The priest is to wave the 2 lambs before the Lord as a wave offering, together with the bread of the first fruits. They are a sacred offering to the Lord for the priest. On the same day, you are to proclaim a sacred assembly and do no regular work. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come, wherever you live. When you reap the harvest of your land, do not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. Leave them for the poor and for the foreigner residing among you. I am the Lord your God.
Thanks, Becky. So this section, the Feast of Weeks, is 7 full weeks after the first fruits offering. And this has to do with what's being offered here are loaves of bread made from the grain that had been harvested. And so and they're called first fruits in verse 17. the loaves of bread are. So the Israelites were commanded to offer the harvest, the first fruit of the harvest, meaning the first thing they harvested. And then also then offer later, after the harvest had been brought in, the actual product that was produced from that harvest, in this case, bread. And the just probably, I'm guessing, it doesn't say specifically, but in the first fruits offering, the Israelites were not allowed to eat any bread or roasted or new grain until after the priest had come out of the temple, after he had offered the first fruits. And then they're allowed to go ahead and do that. So the priest comes out and does that and says, now you may partake in the harvest, basically. I'm thinking the same thing happens here after they have the harvest in and they're starting to make things with it. Let's see. Monica, can you read 23 through 32?
The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, on the first day of the 7th month, you have a day of rest, a sacred assembly commemorated with trumpet blasts. Do no regular work, but present an offering made to the Lord by fire. The Lord said to Moses, the 10th day of this 7th month is the Day of Atonement. Hold a sacred assembly and deny yourselves, and present an offering made to the Lord by fire. Do no work on that day, because it is the Day of Atonement, when atonement is made for you before the Lord your God. Anyone who does not deny himself on that day must be cut off from his people. I will destroy from among his people anyone who does any work on that day. You shall do no work at all. This is to be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come wherever you live. It is a Sabbath of rest for you, and you must deny yourselves. From the evening of the 9th day of the month until the following evening, you are to observe your Sabbath.
Thank you. I'll read the last bit. The Lord said to Moses, say to the Israelites, on the 15th day of the 7th month, the Lord's Feast of Tabernacles begins, and it lasts for 7 days. The first day is a sacred assembly. Do no regular work. For 7 days present offerings made to the Lord by fire, and on the 8th day hold a sacred assembly and present an offering made to the Lord by fire. It is the closing assembly. Do no regular work. These are the Lord's appointed feasts, which you are to proclaim as sacred assemblies for bringing offerings made to the Lord by fire, the burnt offerings and the grain offerings, sacrifices and drink offerings required for each day. These offerings are in addition to those for the Lord's Sabbaths, and in addition to your gifts and whatever you have vowed, and all the free will offerings you give to the Lord. So, beginning with the 15th day of the 7th month, after you have gathered the crops of the land, celebrate the festival to the Lord for 7 days. The first day is a day of rest, and the 8th day is also a day of rest. On the first day, you are to take choice fruit from the trees and palm fronds, leafy branches and poplars, and rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. Celebrate this as a festival to the Lord for 7 days each year. This will be a lasting ordinance for the generations to come. Celebrate it in the 7th month. Live in booths for 7 days. All native-born Israelites are to live in booths, so your descendants will know that I had the Israelites live in booths when I brought them out of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So Moses announced to the Israelites the appointed feasts of the Lord. So I wanted to read through the chapter because I wanted to just show that all of the harvests are connected with the first fruits, and that all of the harvests are complete at the day of the Feast of Tabernacles, in that 1 week there, that's celebrating the completion of the harvest, and that these are days of begins with the day of rest and ends with the day of rest. And so the harvest period that starts with first fruits, obviously it has an end when all of the harvests are in. And there were a couple, before I say more, there's a couple more passages I wanted to look at. Let's look at Exodus 22:29. which is not on the outline, Exodus 22:29. So this passage just underscores again that the harvesting includes the grapes and also the fruit of the grapes as first fruits. Do not hold back offerings from your granaries or your vats. You must give me the firstborn of your sons. Talking about in the context of firstborn, first fruits, the grain and the wine are spoken of as first fruits. So this brings them continuity with the first fruits of the 144,000. And then Deuteronomy 16:13. So you remember in Revelation 14, the very end, the last scene is the wine press, the wine press of God, where the grapes are gathered and thrown out and then trampled, and the blood of the grape flows. It's just how high is a horse's bridle. Deuteronomy 16:13, celebrate the Feast of Tabernacles for 7 days after you have gathered the produce of your threshing floor, that's the grain, and your wine press. So the only point I'm making in all of this is that there's not we're not talking about separate things. When we talk about first fruit and harvest, they're all connected. And when we're talking about the Israelite harvest calendar, what happened during the year, it begins with first fruits and it's grain, and then eventually gets to grapes, and everything is harvested. Everything is offered to the Lord, and it's all the relation of the first fruit to the final harvest is that the first fruit is the recognition that everything comes from God and is itself a promise that God will bring about what he has said. And so the continuity, there's I keep repeating myself, I'm sorry. Does anybody get the point I'm trying to make? Is that when we talk about first fruits, we're including the harvest. I guess that's the point I'm making. And so when we get to Revelation 14 and we see the 144,000 described as first fruits, and then the passage ends with harvest, we connect them together instead of separating them into first fruits for God and the harvest is judgment of God's enemies. That would be to separate them. But to put them together would be to say first fruits are people for God, harvest is people for God. I guess that's what I'm trying to get to eventually. So that is, I think at this point, I think I want to move forward a little bit and look at Revelation 14:20, where it says the winepress was trodden outside the city. I want to look at outside the city. So on the outline, I think that's page 3. Might be page 4 if you have that blank page. Yeah, page 4. Outside the city. Let's look at Hebrews 13:11 and 14. 11 to 14. The high priest carries the blood of animals. Oops, I'm reading the wrong. No, I'm in the right place. 13:11, Hebrews 13:11. The high priest carries the blood of animals into the most holy place as a sin offering, but the bodies are burned outside the camp. And so Jesus also suffered outside the city gate to make the people holy through his own blood. Let us then go to him outside the camp, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. This passage, I think, can appropriately be brought in to the Revelation 14 passage about the winepress being trodden outside the city. The outside the city idea would have had great meaning for the Christians in the first century because of this passage here, because of Jesus being outside the city when he was crucified, because of Stephen being outside the city when he was martyred. And there's even a parable, we'll look at that in a second, that has outside the city as the place of the death of God's servants. So this passage says that we're to go outside the camp, outside the city, bearing the disgrace he bore. For here we do not have an enduring city, but we are looking for the city that is to come. One of the contrasts in Revelation 13, 14, and 15 is that those who follow the beast have no rest, but those who follow the Lamb have rest eternally. And because the things that we have in Christ are so much better than the things that are offered here in the world. And that's what the writer of the Hebrews is saying. We don't have an enduring city here. There's nothing here for us. We look forward to that city that is to come. Let's look at Acts 7:58. Becky, do you see where we are? Okay. I'm at the, maybe it's first, which outline are you using? The original one or the
one you sent yesterday, and I'm absolutely lost.
page 3? Show me what your page 3 looks like. Okay. Right-hand column, kind of the upper part of that right-hand paragraph, verse 20. Okay, great. So we just read through Hebrews. Let's look at Acts 7:58. We read this the other day, but it's worthwhile looking at again. (7:58). 7:57. At this they covered their ears, and yelling at the top of their voices, they all rushed at him, that is Stephen, dragged him out of the city and began to stone him. Meanwhile, the witnesses laid their clothes at the feet of a young man named Saul. So Stephen's dragged out of the city and stoned, just like Jesus was crucified outside the city, as the writer of the Hebrews says. Just as Christians are encouraged to go outside the city, to follow Jesus outside the city. And that's significant again with Revelation 14, because in Revelation 14, those who 144,000, they're those who follow the Lamb wherever he goes, and he goes outside the city. Let's look at Luke chapter 20. You guys know the story. Let's look at verse 9. He went on to tell the people this parable. A man planted a vineyard. So we're talking about a vineyard, interesting, rented to some farmers, and went away for a long time. At harvest time, he sent a servant to the tenants so they would give him some of the fruit of the vineyard. But the tenants beat him and sent him away empty-handed. He sent another servant, but that one also they beat and treated shamefully and sent away empty-handed. He sent still a third, and they wounded him and threw him out. Then the owner of the vineyard said, "What shall I do? I will send my son, whom I love. Perhaps they will respect him." But when the tenants saw him, they talked the matter over. "This is the heir," they said. "Let's kill him, and the inheritance will be ours." So they threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. They threw him out of the vineyard and killed him. This is another outside of, motif, right? And then we have 1 Kings 21, which I know none of you were thinking we would end up in 1 Kings today, but there you go. 1 Kings 21. Verse 1, sometime later there was an incident involving a vineyard belonging to Naboth the Jezreelite. The vineyard was in Jezreel, close to the place of Ahab, king of Samaria. Ahab said to Naboth, let me have your vineyard to use for a vegetable garden, since it is close to my palace. In exchange, I will give you a better vineyard, or, if you prefer, I will pay you whatever it's worth. But Naboth replied, the Lord forbid that I should give you the inheritance of my fathers. So Ahab went home, sullen and angry, because Naboth the Jezreelite had said, I will not give you the inheritance of my fathers. He lay on his bed sulking and refused to eat. His wife Jezebel came in and asked him, why are you sullen? Why won't you eat? He answered her, because I said to Naboth the Jezreelite, sell me your vineyard, or if you prefer, I will give you another vineyard in its place. But he said, I will not give you my vineyard. Jezebel, his wife, said, is this how you act as king over Israel? Get up and eat. Cheer up. I'll get the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite. So she wrote letters in Ahab's name, placed a seal on them, and sent them to the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city with him. In those letters she wrote, proclaim a day of fasting and seat Naboth in a prominent place among the people. But seat 2 scoundrels opposite him and have them testify that he has cursed both God and the king, and take him out and stone him to death. So the elders and nobles who lived in Naboth's city did as Jezebel directed in the letters she had written to him. They proclaimed a fast and seated Naboth in a prominent place among the people. Then 2 scoundrels came and sat opposite him and brought charges against Naboth before the people, saying, Naboth has cursed both God and the king. So they took him outside the city and stoned him to death. Then they sent word to Jezebel, Naboth has been stoned and is dead. Who's the good guy in the story? Naboth is the good guy in the story. Do you see how Naboth and Jesus are linked here? Let's find some guys to make up some stuff about Jesus and testify against him so we can condemn him. Let's take him outside the city and kill him. Okay, this is what's going on here. Outside the city is the place where martyrs go. That's what happens. Outside the city is the place where people who are unjustly suffering go. And so we have in the Revelation 14 passage, the winepress being trodden outside the city. And so the thought there is, and of course, if this is a judgment, let's think about it like this. If this is a judgment passage, Revelation 14, if it's a judgment passage on the evil, wicked Babylon the Great, or, if it's Jerusalem or if it's Rome, let's say are 2 big contenders, that if Revelation 14 at the end of it is a judgment passage, the people inside the city are the ones that get judged, not the ones outside, right? In fact, later on in the Revelation, just like we read in Isaiah 53 or 52, in Isaiah 52, the people were told to leave, to get out, because God was going to bring about redemption. In Revelation, the people are going to be told to flee, get out of Babylon, leave it. Just like Jesus told his followers on the siege in Jerusalem, he said, when you see the abomination and desolation, get out of the city, because it's the people inside the city that receive the judgment of God as far as a punitive judgment. The people outside the city don't get judged. So when we read in Revelation 14 that the people who look like they're getting trampled to death are outside the city, this is not a judgment scene on the city, because it's happening outside the city, not in the city. So, and then of course we talked about some of the contextual reasons why this would be a picture of the martyrs. The final one, which we'll talk about next week, because we're out of time right now, maybe not the final one, but another significant one, is that what's being made outside the city is wine, right? The grapes are being trampled, and this is how they made wine. And what's happening is that Babylon the Great is filling up the cup of God's wrath, the wine of the cup of God's wrath, which he will make her drink. But what is that wine? It is the blood of the martyrs. She's filled herself up with the blood of the saints. So, so that's something. We'll look at those passages. You're familiar with them, but we'll look at those passages on Tuesday and kind of wrap up the case for what the end of the chapter is about, and then we'll go through the chapter, and it'll make more sense to us. Any questions or comments or thoughts for today? Again, everybody's quiet. I know I didn't do such a good job that everybody's quiet. I could have confused everybody. That might have happened. Go ahead.
I actually had a lingering question on first fruits and I can't put my finger on the passage, but the firstborn are also considered first fruits. And so does that mean that their lives are to be dedicated to God?
Yeah.
And they're removed from their mother's care on their 8th day?
No, not all of them, but they are to be ceremonially brought before the Lord and dedicated to him. The firstborn are to be set aside for God in recognition that all the children, all your children come from God. All life comes from God. And
okay.
Yeah. So good question.
But I bet that's a whole other series.
It is. It's a whole other series, and I would have to do a whole bunch more preparation to really answer those questions with the detail that they deserve.
Yeah, because I'm sure that's not just a one sentence passage and then we move on.
No. No. And then of course, when we talk about firstborn, there's so Exodus 4:22 is a really good passage that comes in on firstborn. Exodus 4:22. So the Lord says, and you get the same thing when you get to the 10th plague, but the Lord says about Israel, Israel is my firstborn. So the entire nation, not just the boys and girls, the entire nation, firstborn, right? And this is the explanation for the 10th plague. Egypt attacks my firstborn. I'm going to kill their firstborn. Yeah, interesting. And of course, the firstborn is the one that receives. He receives the lion's share of the inheritance. So the firstborn is the heir, and yet all of God's people are firstborn. By analogy, if Israel is firstborn, then all of God's people are firstborn. And so, yeah, there's a lot there, and it's fascinating study. You could say the same thing about any subject in the Bible, I think. Good question. All right. Well, thank you. I see Alicia's not going to be with us on Tuesday. Sorry, we're gonna miss having you on Tuesday. And saw that my mom had to drop out, and Stephanie. And did you have something else, Becky?
I just wanted to. I'm on jury duty this month,
okay.
So if I don't show up, that's probably where I am.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, Alicia, you had something.
She's frozen in time.
She's frozen in time. Oh, there she is. She's back.
Bob picks up our Texas kids.
Missed it. You're going in and out. Try again.
Bob picks our Texas kids up from the airport tomorrow.
Okay.
Our son-in-law is only staying 4 days, but I'm asking for travel mercy prayers for them.
Okay.
Megan, Brandon, and Luke.
Megan, Brandon, and Luke. Okay. All right. Who would like to pray as we end? I'm going to turn off the recording.